in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it another minute before we get started.
And good afternoon, everyone, by the way. So,
All right, let's get started. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar session today. My name is Shelley James. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at Exciting in the US. Today, we're going to talk about secure authentication and single sign-on for applications in hybrid SAP landscapes. Our presenter today is Karsten Alt, one of our senior SAP security experts. A couple of things to mention before we get started. This is one of several new webinars that we are working on for this year. Please watch for upcoming announcements on our Exciting LinkedIn page and from our Exciting newsletter. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, let me know and I'll send you a link to register. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. Just type in your questions. We'll keep an eye on them. And then at the end of Karsten's presentation, we'll try to answer those questions. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a link to the recording from GoToWebinar later. And you'll receive an email from our marketing team to follow up and make sure that you got all your questions answered. If you have any additional ones, please send them back to the marketing email or to me at sjames@exciting.com and we can help answer them offline. Now that we have those items covered, I'm going to hand things over to Karsten and he's going to walk you through today's session. Karsten?
yes, thanks, Shelley. Great. Also from my side, welcome everyone to our webinar. So I see we have an international crowd today. So glad to see the topic of secure authentication in the SAP space generates such interest. Now, from my side, I would like to say hello to all customers and partners being here. My name is Karsten Alt, and as you may hear, I'm working for Exciting in Germany as a senior SAP security consultant and focus mainly on secure authentication and single sign-on. And today we talk about SSO in the context of both, so cloud and on-premises. So in both areas, there are solutions available that SAP have been established since many years now. And when it comes to this topic, really, we have a strong focus on the business to employee scenario, meaning to support really SAP organizations finding the best, most simplest and convenient application access to for their employees. Yeah. In this webinar, we will take a closer look at, first of all, the basic principles of single sign-on and also some information about best practices, requirements regarding the implementation of the two SAP solutions in that space. And also we talk about and take a quick look at the agenda when it comes to the roadmap for the SAP Cloud Identity Services and the single sign-on product. So how will the on-premise product evolve in the future? And if time allows, we will also provide information about our exciting cloud security services and the components when it comes to identity access management in the hybrid world. One thing to add from my side, as usual, you will benefit from current best practices in our webinars. So if you want to see pure specifications regarding the two products, you can get them from SAP anytime. So here we rather focus on educational concepts and content that is hopefully from benefit for you. Okay. All right, then let's start. First of all, before we start with the topic, let me briefly introduce you Exciting. So who we are, what we do, where we are from, in case you don't know it. So Exciting has been founded in 28. We were founded and still headquartered in Switzerland. and we have also offices throughout Europe, so in Germany, in UK, in France, in Romania, and also in the United States. Yeah, we are specialized in SAP security, obviously. We are an SAP Gold partner. We provide services in the form of consulting, so helping customers with various topics around SAP security, like role designs, like S/4HANA migrations, GRC, IDM, single sign-on implementations, and others. So also we have own tools, part of our portfolio, and we are fully certified, meaning everything we do is really 100% SAP standard, which allows us to be really certified for the cloud as well. We are also SAP education partners, so we do a lot of SAP trainings, we develop own trainings, and we're holding training sessions for SAP and together with SAP. As of now, we are around 110 employees and we are growing globally. For your reference, just a brief overview of our security solutions and consulting services. So our core businesses clearly is around roles and authorizations management. So all and foremost with our XAMS, but we also cover quite other topics like SAP Enterprise Threat Detection, security monitoring, CM integration and that stuff. So also cloud is really a big area with countless use cases. And here our focus is clearly identity and access management. So in this hybrid world, which is also today's main topic. If you have any further questions about company, about our portfolio, you're welcome to get in touch with us. All right. So let's start with the topic. First of all, yeah, you know that access to IT systems must be restricted, must be controlled. So even before applying authorizations, user identification and authentication are the first line of defense to prevent unauthorized access. And this is really important in the context of both on-premise and the cloud. It is a core element of information security. And yet we have made the experience this topic is often neglected, especially on-premise, because in the cloud you have more, let's say, secure by default, and yeah, you rather use new standards already there. So a centralized user and authentication management really guarantees compliance with access governance, with security policies, and is the foundation for establishing single sign-on. So with a single sign-on solution, in short, you can get rid of those many login screens and your credentials that you may have to remember and use today for accessing your on-premises and cloud applications. So that's really, when it comes to SSO, a two-step approach. That's meaning SSO allows outsourcing or delegating the real task of authentication to a central system. And that central instance really verifies the user's identity and it supports various authentication methods. And for that reason, I would not just call it SSO, you know, because it's more. It could involve multi-factor authentication or even a passwordless authentication. So as a result, the user authentication is really performed only once, and that is called the primary authentication. An example could be to reuse your Windows login you already have or your session at your identity provider. And the second step, the access to all single sign-on enabled applications then happens automatically. And that is possible based on a security token that is issued by the central system and that is used for the downstream authentication, which is actually the real authentication to the target application. The exchange of this security token is a security sensitive information, as you may know, so you have to protect the information, the security token itself, against unauthorized access, against tampering. And that really ensures the required confidentiality and integrity. So finally, applications must trust the issuer of the token, must then identify the user, which is part of the token, and then assign the user to the correct user in the application backend. So foundation for everything around SSO is always trust. Yeah, let's have a look at the basic concept. now you learned already, we authenticate first against a system that is very often not an SAP component. Yeah? It's usually your Active Directory, could be your Azure AD, could be your Okta solution, or any other solution you may think of. The system knows your corporate accounts, so your central user identity that you already have. It knows your credentials that you have, and once authenticated, this central system really issues the single sign-on token that you require to access your applications. So this way you no longer need to possess multiple passwords for each application, and also these applications that you now be able to access easily are also may enforce a second factor of authentication. So you can, based on rules, based on conditions, easily enforce multi-factor authentication whenever required. And following that approach, really brings huge benefits in security and in identity management. So it allows, for example, faster on and offboarding. In particular, you can prevent access to all your applications without having to lock the respective user account in each and single application. Yeah? So it's very important that SSO makes your business users happy. You can see this guy is smiling here, and also the security admins. So it's, in summary, it's really a proper SSO implementation, offers many advantages when it comes to security and convenience. That's the important point. We have put everything together on one slide. So most common front ends, communication protocols involved with SAP applications, also transport mechanisms that ensure encryption, and single sign-on methods or token formats. So even if customers move to cloud-centric landscapes, they still rely on SAP GUI for some scenarios. And because of that, there is still a need to have SSO for the SAP GUI and the related tools covered. And that's what we see here in the first step. So really, we implement the solution SAP Single Sign-On 3 often in that space. It is the best practice for SAP GUI Single Sign-On. And you may know SNC with Kerberos and certificates are the mechanism of choice. Now, this way you really cover all applications that are based on those two protocols, dialog RFC, and ensure a token-based authentication. And of course, there are other applications, so HTTP-based applications that are running on premises and consumed via the browser, like WebDynbros, like UI5, Fiori applications, portals, and so on. So on-premise solution from SAP can also, of course, used for this. However, with the increasing cloud usage, the topic of Saml authentication and the role of a central identity provider has become more important. And nowadays, it's a best practice to authenticate all HTTP applications via an upstream IDP. And that's when the Cloud Identity Services come into the game. And this is now really the standard identity provider for the business technology platform and for all software as a service applications. And you will, in any case, have to consider this component, even if you already use Okta, ADFS, Azure AD, and so on. Yeah? So it's more or less a SAML and OpenID Connect identity provider. And as such, it supports all HTTP applications. So it's just important to consider you are allowed to use the identity authentication service for all SAP applications, also on premises, without additional costs. And that means only those applications that are based on dialog RFC, they can't make use of the IIS because they don't support HTTP and SAML. And that's why it's quite normal to have both solutions that are combined together as part of an overall authentication concept in an organization. Again, here we see the traditional SAP application landscape that you can see on the left side and the cloud applications on the right. And typically, as a link between both worlds, the cloud connectivity service and the cloud connector are important components. So imagine you want really to have an application that runs in the business technology platform or a service to access data on your on-premise systems. So you must use the Cloud Connector in this way, meaning that applications inside BTP are using the destination service, like for HTTP, like for RFC communications. So the first thing is really to expose your services, have an access control list, but also the second step is also to provide single sign-on capabilities. So typical examples are really, for example, the integration of SAP Analytics Cloud with your on-premises BW or HANA database. And you may also think about having a central launchpad, Fiori central launchpad that runs in the cloud and that has to access OData services that are exposed on your on-premise S/4HANA backends. For such scenarios, the SAP Cloud Connector really enables single sign-on by using its built-in PKI and by issuing so-called short-lived certificates to really propagate the cloud identity towards your on-premise systems. So by using on the left side single sign-on 3 for your on-premise world and identity authentication together with the Cloud Connector, we can say that we solve most requirements to allow a seamless authentication experience in hybrid SAP landscapes. But as always, there is a little bit more to consider when it comes to a holistic approach. So it's not only authentication, it's very important also to take care about the identity lifecycle. So how do users really get into the cloud applications? How can this be done in an automated way? So ID lifecycle is becoming more important whenever applications are outsourced to the cloud. So you want to automate at least basic tasks with simple means to avoid manual efforts. And there is a few approaches you can use, so even without having a full-blown IDM in place, and we will talk also about this a little bit later. And lastly, the authorization layer, so authorization and compliance. So how are users really correctly authorized? As a company, you have the responsibility to detect and also to mitigate access violations. So you may want to check your assigned authorizations also against the rule set, just to cover SODs and critical authorizations. And so two, let's say, additional requirements that are not necessarily related only to authentication, but they are very important in a holistic point of view. So short summary, challenges, typical challenges and requirements. As I said before, in your authentication concept, you should cover really all applications regardless where they are running. You should focus on a so-called single source of truth, so a central system that has all your user identity in one place, that knows your credentials, and that you can use to really centralize your authentication process, and this way allow single sign-on any device. But also it's important to really be flexible enough when it comes to sending the correct name identifiers towards your cloud applications or on-premise applications. Also, additional claims may be used for authorization purposes like group claims and that stuff. And you should really have to set up a system that allows you to have that kind of flexibility. You not only want to have single sign-on, but you also want to have the possibility to implement risk-based authentication rules based on certain conditions for certain applications and especially for certain user types. And one important thing to consider is really authentication experience should be the same for both cloud and on-premises, so that avoids really phishing attacks, social engineering attacks, to have a kind of corporate identity for your authentication screens. Again, not to forget the two additional topics, so how to manage users, how to really manage the life cycle, and how to manage your authorizations. As a summary, just some things to consider in your security strategy for your reference. So really, first step is always to identify the different kind of users. It's not only employees, very often also external accounts that needs to be managed. So each account has different requirements for authentication. You need to cover your authorizations and governance topics. And then, of course, you need to provide a user authentication journey that really covers your seamless single sign-on experience from the cloud to on-premises and vice versa. Have a central store for your identities, have your IDM and joiner mover leaver processes in place. This is all more or less the basics that you need to know when it comes to those topics. So now let's take a closer look at the two solutions. So start with the single sign-on on-premise solution. As always, you need to cover, as I said before, on-premise applications. So the leading capability of this product is still the secure login client. And it's mainly really to provide single sign-on for the SAP GUI. So there are many integration options with that solution. And like the name would imply, it is not just SSO, but it also provides encryption. So it brings the SNC library to the client and the front end and the back end. And also it offers digital signatures, re-authentication. You can use it for the two-factor authentication for your SAP GUI. And you also can integrate it with your existing PKI to be able to manage your server certificates in your SAP on-premise landscape. It also supports smart cards, RFID tokens, so it's really a cornerstone for on-premises environment. On the other side, we can see the identity authentication, which is really, since a while, merged with the identity provisioning component, and the umbrella term for that is SAP Cloud Identity Services. So it's a holistic service that comes with capabilities of secure authentication, of course, single sign-on, but also identity provisioning. So it acts as a central system, providing one integration point for all your SAP applications, regardless if they are running in the cloud, like BTP, sub-account applications, own, let's say, tools that you develop there, or software as a service applications, as well as your on-premise systems. So in summary, operation of both solutions really cover your all your SAP applications together with the most important single sign-on standards. So we have a lot of services around that topic, by the way. So in case you don't know it, just take a look at our website. We start always with a best practice workshop. We support customers with concepts, solution concepts for single sign-on implementation. Of course, we do the implementation, we perform audit and security checkings, and also documentation, troubleshooting, support, so as well as training. Just skip that for time reasons, so just have a look. And also now let's talk about the identity services in more detail. So often that's a little bit unclear for our customers. So what does SAP mean by this, and really what does this service do? First of all, SAP Cloud Identity Services is a public cloud service operated by SAP in different regions and at a provider of choice. So SAP has established standards for authentication and user management, and they call it core service. That's a core service is part of the business technology platform. So all applications in that universe connect more or less to that core service. You can establish central instance that really can automate access and really control access to all SAP applications. And the main components of this cloud identity services is the one step, the identity authentication service, or IAS, but also the identity provisioning service, or IPS. So both are now on the same technology stack, and they come bundled with the BTP or with the software as a service applications from SAP. So the identity authentication on the one hand is really made of as a central authentication hub, more or less. Yeah, it connects all SAP applications. There's a trust relationship to that SAP applications, and many organizations already have an identity provider, so you can easily connect with your corporate identity provider that already knows your credentials. On the other hand, you have to think about ID lifecycle. So the identity provisioning service automates the lifecycle for your cloud identities and allows provisioning of users and the assignment of the appropriate authorizations. So it's really the idea that this system brings user information from one or many sources to your cloud applications in an automated way. And there's one important thing to understand really, that SAP doesn't plan to evolve this system as a full cloud IDM. That's more an integration game, and the relevant standard for this is really the SCIM protocol. So SAP offers a lot of connectors with the IPS for the most of the cloud applications, and they are still developing new connectors. So there are different operating modes that you can operate this system, and you can also integrate with third-party or even an SAP IDM. Yeah. For example, the IPS supplies a proxy function that really takes over the communication, and so the sub IDM must not even support the cloud application, but just the identity provisioning is then really taking over the communication between those two sites. All right, just some basics for the beginning. But now let's shortly talk about user provisioning, because in our projects, often we start with single sign-on, and then we talk about other related topics like the automated user provisioning or the integration with IDM systems. And although it's not focus of this webinar, I want to shortly cover that as well. So let's take a closer look here. First of all, in the first step, you have your identity provisioning service and you integrate this service really with your single source of truth. And that could be a system like Active Directory, Azure AD, but also could be your HCM SuccessFactors that really knows about all your users, all your attributes in your organization. In this way, you can then really transport this information based on certain conditions, certain filters and rules into your identity directory, which is then used by both the IAS and the IPS. So question is often, what is the identity directory? So it's in short, it's really a database that allows persistence of user data, of attributes and group assignments. You can think about it like a cloud central user administration. It bundles all information. It's the foundation to really control access to your cloud applications. And you can also access this identity directory via a SCIM API, so from any SCIM compliant IDM or whatever. So the central user store plays an important role because you can use this system and the content in there to really then provision your target applications. So once the identities are created there, they are enriched with further attributes like the user unique ID, and you can also enrich it with additional attributes from your source systems like the SuccessFactors system. As a result, you have really a central user identity for the whole SAP application landscape in the hybrid world. And then really by having a groups concept and a transformation strategy in use, you can then really provision those accounts using the SCIM standard towards your BTP sub-accounts, towards your SaaS applications, and so on. So please keep in mind, this is just one of many possible scenarios for managing identities in a hybrid landscape, and it's really presented in a simple way here. So there are many different approaches, especially when it comes to a combination with identity management systems. Just a summary, so just for your reference, you can read them later on. Again, short reminder, you really use one or many single source of truth, so systems where you have your user information available. You read them using transformation logics, and using intermediate JSON file, you can really then transform them to your identity directory. And once user information is there, you really use the identity directory as the source system for all your target applications in the cloud. That's also a best practice that SAP uses and that SAP also recommends. Great. So also let's take a closer look at the identity authentication service. So customers mainly use the identity authentication service in basically two scenarios. The first is the IDP proxy. So instead of replacing your existing IDP that you already may have, the identity authentication service just handles the integration with the whole SAP landscape from a federation and trust perspective. But it leaves the whole authentication topic in the hands of your corporate IDP. So you still use the single sign-on capabilities of your corporate identity provider in that scenario. That means also that all your non-SAP applications will continue to use your existing IDP. And for all SAP applications, the assertions are channeled through the IAS, which really gives you the highest level of flexibility. And in most cases, we really implement and also recommend exactly this scenario. The second scenario is really then to use the identity authentication service as a landscape-wide IDP for all applications, also including maybe non-SAP applications. So you can make use of the authentication and single sign-on capabilities that are built into the identity authentication service. It's often also a combination, of course, between both modes. So it's quite normal, for example, if you have externals, if you have partner accounts that also should be able to support you with your cloud applications, but you don't want to create those external accounts in your Active Directory, for example. You can manage them in the identity directory and create a user type partner, for example. That's really a lot of flexibility that allows the system and has a lot of nice features, like it supports FIDO2, so enhanced multi-factor authentication. It supports hardware devices that really allow you to have a very secure passwordless authentication experience. So let's take a look at a authentication flow that we typically implement at our customers. So here you start with a user. A user wants to access applications. Applications could be business technology platform, software as a service, or on-premise. And in the best case, those applications are trust the identity authentication service. So on the other side, we want to implement or integrate with our corporate IDP, because this guy knows all about our users and credentials, so we don't need to replicate our user passwords, credentials, and so on into this system. So the idea is really this system knows about all your users, and also your corporate IDP may support additional capabilities, like, for example, here we use Azure AD that has conditional access that can use kind of policies like Intune policies. You can check for company managed devices and all that kind of stuff that really is nice and makes totally sense when it comes to security nowadays. On the other hand, we have then the identity directory as part of the identity services. So the user database, as you learned, we provide user information in there via IPS or maybe via third-party systems. And then we have really now a central user identity inside of this system, with all the attributes for the users that we require. We can manage also custom attributes, and really it's important to consider that these identities have no credentials. It's really the authentication still happens here at the identity or at the corporate identity provider. Sorry. All right. And let's take a look at the authentication flow. So first of all, user tries to access the application. Application redirects to the IDP, and the IDP then, based on rules, maybe knows to delegate this authentication to a corporate IDP because it may be an employee that tries to connect. In step 4, the employee really authenticates for the first time. And that could be traditional username, password, could be multi-factor, could be SSO as well. So this process may be completely transparent for the user as well. And then the first SAML token is issued from the corporate IDP. So the idea of this SAML token is not to use it for the target application, but to use it as a, let's say, to propagate the identity from the corporate IDP towards the identity in this identity authentication service. So it's really to find the link between the identities in both worlds. And once there, now in step 6, the IIS knows about the user. He knows about the target application the user wants to connect to. And really, it can issue then the final single sign-on token or SAML assertion or ID token containing the required identifiers, like an email address, or for another application, you need an employee ID or login name, and so on. Then really, this token is then also enriched maybe with certain claims, like group claims and other attributes that a target application may evaluate for authorization purposes. So it's individually possible for each application, and it allows you really to also make use of risk-based rules inside the identity authentication service. So the final decision to access the application is up to the identity authentication service. The last step, really, the user via the user's browser gets in possession of the single sign-on token and then sends it via the browser to the target application. And this flow is only, let's say, one authentication step was required here, as you may see in step 4. But as I said, that could be fully transparent for the user without any login screens and so on. All right. So now I'd like to shortly switch over to my demo environment. So hopefully this works. Let me see if I can share the screen. So now you should see my screen. And Shelley, just let me know if everyone can see the Windows client here. Okay, I hope you can see it. All right, so first of all, I want to show you a small demo when it comes to access an application in the business technology platform. So I have prepared a demonstration here. Let's just quickly connect to our identity authentication service tenant. So it's very hot in here today, so maybe my system is very slow. Hopefully it's getting better. Very slow. Okay, try it again. Seems I have an issue with the connection. That's when it comes to a live demonstration. It's always the same. Just want to avoid to record my session, but so hopefully it will work now. If not, I will skip this. Very sorry. I can provide maybe a short video in the next block and then send it over to the participants. I'm very sorry for that. So it seems we have an issue with the VPN client at the moment. So let me just switch back to the presentation. So sorry, guys. But that's life. All right. So yeah, maybe we have then more time for the questions part. All right. Before we switch over to the identity management and also the identity access management building blocks, as I promised, there's a short update and a short overview of the roadmap items for the SAP Cloud Identity Services in this year. So we want just to highlight the most important features from our point of view. Yeah, if you are interested to learn more, so we have provided the links here. You can just use the embedded links to see all the roadmap features for this service. So as I said, today, both components, identity authentication, identity provisioning, are more or less separate. Yeah. By the end of the year, SAP plans really to fully consolidate these two services together in a new user interface. So you have really then one admin interface. On the other side, the re-platforming already took place. So the IPS and the IIS now at least share a same common tenant. Yeah? And on request, you can also migrate your old IPS bundle tenants to the new infrastructure. And that really, with the new tenants, for example, IPS allows to schedule jobs more flexible. So you can really use dates and times for your job scheduling. And it also has improved troubleshooting and logging capabilities. And everyone who's really working with the IPS and tries to find errors knows what I mean. So really in the upcoming months, there's a lot of new connectors planned, so job result prediction and that kind of stuff. Regarding the future of the product Single Sign-On version 3, also there is one important topic I like to point out here. So it is on the identity authentication roadmap for next year. It's still subject to be changed, so I don't know exactly if it's really will be available in that kind of stage, but the idea, I like it really much because if you can see here, we have the idea to really use the secure login client that you may use or know from the Single Sign-On 3 component to really make use of a Saml Authentication Flow. So you authenticate based on Saml to your identity authentication server, and then you really forward it to the corporate IDP if you like to do so. So you can use single sign-on, you can use, but also multi-factor authentication. And as a result, you receive a certificate from a cloud component, part of the identity authentication service in the future. That is a short-lived certificate that will be installed back on the secure login client and then used by the sub GUI to connect to your on-premise application service. That really offers a lot of advantages when it comes to MFA requirements, when it comes to pure Azure AD environments where you have no longer a domain, so you have no Kerberos in place for those scenarios. And also, as some of you may use the secure login server from SAP, which is part of SSO3. So you no longer need to have an SAP ACE Java in an instance in place to really host your secure login server on-premise. And that's really a cool feature, and I'm looking forward to this and can't wait for it. So also I have written a blog last year, end of last year, with my wish list for maybe next major release of the software, and also have updated this blog with some highlights about this feature. So you can find it here embedded in our documents. All right, now, since we have time, since the live demonstration was a fail, let's go over and switch over to the topic of identity and access management. So we learned that authentication and single sign-on is only one part of an overall identity and access management solution within a hybrid world. So there is the identity lifecycle or management layer, and equally important is the topic of access governance. Yeah? So in the first step, when it comes to identity management, you can, as I said before, establish very simple approaches where you have no workflows, you have just, let's say, also no identity management in place. You have simple jobs that really read user information from multiple source systems and write it to multiple target systems. So there is no feature parity with the IPS and an IDM system. For example, the IPS is lacking business roles, it has no workflows and all that stuff. But you can also use the premium version, so you integrate with your SAP or third-party identity management. You can use like SailPoint or MADA, One Identity, and those kind of identity management systems. And they really map and automate your joiner, mover, leaver processes to make use of those components, and you already use workflows for providing information and approving access. So the aim is really that all users receive the accounts and authorizations they need at the time and according to the least principle or least privilege of least privilege. And also lastly, access governance. For access governance, really IDM is not enough. Yeah, you need a layer to support integration to GRC. So that's because an employee's job functions and roles may change frequently, which then lead to access risks and maybe also conflicts. And this is really difficult or impossible to recognize without having a GRC framework in place. So here, the SAP Identity Access Governance together with access control really ensure that those risks resulting from newly assigned authorizations can be mitigated. Yeah? And this last layer also offers compliance, SOD checks, also approval workflows and the powerful business rule management. Also emergency users are covered. So there's a lot of information that you can have from these systems. All right. Yeah, and just a small information about the services in that space. So we have geared our cloud consulting services to cover really these three identity access management layers. So with our teams of consultants, we have a lot of experience in each sections and really implement the solutions at our customers. So you can learn more about our SAP Cloud Security Services in one of our blogs. You also find the links inside the presentation. So at a glance, just to provide you with an overview of our services in that area, we have really divided them into three layers. So on the one hand, we start with our best practice workshop, which is typically the start in every project we do. So that helps us really to carry out an analysis and inventory of the customer environment, really to understand the exact requirements, and on the other hand, to provide the customer also with best practices and with SAP recommendations and know-how. So in every cloud project, we learn new things and extend our experience. And with our holistic approach, it really is our motivation to really find the best solution for the customer based on his specific requirements. So it's never just one direction. There could be many different implementation scenarios. And then we have the process and design level where we really develop these scenarios. And here are our service areas really work closely together. So we have experts with a focus on each of those areas, maybe GRC, IDM, or even single sign-on. So we really combine this with the matching solutions from SAP. All right. So I have to say I'm very sorry for the live demonstration part. As I said, I promise I will create a video and we will share you with that video together with our next newsletter or something like that. I talk to our marketing department. And for now, yeah, I'd like to say thank you for your interest and for your attention, and for any questions related to those topics. Yeah, if you have no questions here, maybe that you can drop me a mail anytime, and let's just take a look at the questions now. Kelly, do we have some?
We don't. You must have covered it well.
Oh my gosh. So it's absolutely no issue. As I said, drop us an email when it comes to questions. Summary, you will also find our key takeaways. You find additional information about exciting and SAP resources. So small overview about our cloud security services and some key takeaways and recommendation when it comes to implement single sign-on in hybrid environments. Let's just take a look, and maybe there are some questions. Don't be shy, ask them. And if not, then we are absolutely 10 minutes earlier than expected. So
there's one question. Like to know how you would handle test user management in BTP multi-factor authentication.
Oh, okay. It's an important question, interesting one. I will prepare the answer for you and send it afterwards.
Okay. All right. If nothing else, then thank you, Karsten. And remember to watch for information regarding our upcoming sessions. Again, we will update the information on LinkedIn and in our newsletter once they're available. There is a YouTube playlist. You should all have received an email with the link to that playlist. If not, please drop me an email at sjames@exciting.com. Let me know and I'll send it out to you again. Every session will be part of the playlist. If you have the link, bookmark it and you can use it over and over. We typically upload every session recording within 48 hours after the session occurs. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye-bye. So.